Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 23rd edition of the Observatory's Cannes Conference. My name is Maja Cappello. I am the head of Department for Legal Information at the Observatory and currently also its acting director during the maternity leave of the incumbent. And on behalf of the whole Observatory team, I'm very happy to see you so numerous and loyal to this Saturday morning appointment despite competing events that are happening at the same time. So very much appreciated that you are here with us this morning. As you will know, this year we will talk about incentives for film production. And public support for film production can, of course, as you know very well, be declined in two different ways. You can make public money available for producers, and that would be direct public support, or you can create incentives for private money to be invested in film production, which is production incentives, and which is the focus of today's conference. Now, one could be tempted to ask oneself, as a sort of modern-day Hamlet perambulating at the Croisette, public direct support or production incentives. But that is not the question. The question is rather how they can complement each other. Tax and production incentives, they are often described as aiming to develop an industry-based approach to supporting film production, whereas direct public support would take more a culture-based approach to fostering diversity. But this distinction probably needs to be a little bit nuanced, and that is what we're going to discuss today. We will discuss issues like what can be learned about the policy goals that are currently being prioritized through production incentive schemes, and if they are adequately reflected in eligibility criteria. We will also see if these approaches complement or challenge each other, and how patterns of automaticity and selectivity evolving in public support mechanisms are, and what factors may influence these developments. And finally, we will look also into competition between European countries to attract film and productions, if this is resulting in some kind of positive or negative impacts. We will look into all these aspects with a stellar expert panel. We have two producers, two film funds, and two audiovisual media service providers. I will call them up in the order as I mentioned. Filip Bobinski, he is the CEO of Prague-based Dramedy Productions. Carlo Crestodina, he is CEO of the Italian production company Tempesta. Peter Dinges is actually Edith Sepp come first. She is CEO of the Estonian Film Institute. And then we have Peter Dinges, CEO of the German Federal Film Board, FFA. Philippine Cora is Public Policy Manager at Amazon Prime Video, and Marianne Furuvold Boland is Head of Drama, Entertainment and Fiction at the Norwegian Public Service Broadcaster, NRK. Our panel will be moderated by myself and Martin Kanzler, Deputy Head of the Observatory's Market Department, and very soon the Head of Department itself. And as usual, the Observatory team will provide scene-setting context with some snapshots by film analyst Elisa Joliveau-Brenet and Sophie Vallet, who is Deputy Head of the Observatory's Legal Department. I would like to welcome Elisa on stage for the first presentation. Please enjoy.
Thank you, Maya, and good morning, everyone. So, production incentives. During the prep calls, one of the panelists asked us why we're discussing this subject now, and why we're saying that incentives might be a game changer when rather they are in a changing game. So we thought for an introductory presentation, it would be a good idea to address the evolving role of incentives as the game is changing. And I will address changes on two sides. First on the market side and then on the policy side. So on the market side, there are three main changes that I want to address. The first one is that theatrical markets are down, as we know. So cinema admissions are down and they do not seem to be coming back up. In 2025 in Europe, they were 26% below pre-pandemic average. Which might pose a question of revenue source for the European films. And while admissions are down, the number of films released in the cinema is much higher than before the pandemic, while the number of screens have stayed stable. In addition, the market concentration is extremely high, with less than 200 films among the 4,000 new releases each year that capture 80% of total admissions. So for the vast majority of films, this means they won't generate any revenue. A second trend in the market side is that within the audiovisual markets, only SVOD, so subscription video on demand, has been showing growth in the past years. We don't have exact data on SVOD, but it is our understanding that for theatrical films, they will not proportionally benefit from this market growth. And then another thing that it means is that it's putting pressure on traditional broadcasters, as we can see that TV revenues have been stagnating, which can have an impact on the financing of theatrical films. And then the third trend is changing consumer behavior. So as you all know, film is competing for consumer attention with different forms of audiovisual content. And content can be expected to grow even further, particularly with short formats online, with the development and the democratization of AI production tools. So the game is changing on the market side in the sense that the market has become more difficult for theatrical films to generate revenue, to secure financing, and to catch attention. Now, on the policy side, as Maja mentioned, you have different policy tools that can be used by governments to support the audiovisual industry. You have direct public funding, production incentives, or investment obligations, and they can be used for different purposes. So usually investment obligations would be to attract investment of broadcasters and streamers within the industry. You would use production incentives to attract spending in the territory and develop jobs on the industry side, and use direct public funding to support cultural diversity. What they have in common, these three tools, is that across Europe they tend to focus on supporting the creation of works rather than the distribution and exhibition segments. We said that the game is changing, so now we'll explore trends for each of these policy tools, starting with direct public funding. So we have a study that looks at the funds awarded by European film agencies or film funds. And within the direct public funding schemes, we found that selective schemes represented 65% of European funds activity spend, while automatic funding was at 35%. So selective funding remains majority in Europe. But the data, with the evolution over time that we have until 2022, suggests that selective funding has been stagnating, and automatic funding has been growing more strongly between 2018 and 2022. Now, if we take a look at production incentives, we can see that there's a growing number of incentive schemes in European countries, reaching 36 in 2024, according to Olsberg SPI data. And the number of incentives in Europe keeps growing, with new schemes announced in 2025 and 2026, whether they are national schemes in Denmark, Ukraine, or Armenia, regional schemes, or schemes opening up to new forms of content, such as unscripted TV in Ireland. So now almost every country in Europe has an incentive scheme in place, whatever the form, whether they are tax-related, cash rebates, and they have rates ranging between 20% and 45%. A side note, because Edith is on the panel, that Estonia's rate is at 40%, contrary to what's shown on the map. It's hard to get an indication of the volume that incentives represent. We don't have data yet, but we will be working on a research project in the coming months. What we do have, as I mentioned, is data on film agencies, and some film agencies also administer cash rebates. And we found that within the funds allocated by these film agencies that do both, the funds allocated to incentives have grown significantly stronger than direct public funding. So to summarize, we have seen that for direct public funding, automatic schemes seem to be growing, and also that the number of incentive schemes and the volume are growing as well, which might be indicating a shift towards economic-oriented policy in Europe, but I leave that to the panel to discuss later. Now let's have a look at the third policy tool, investment obligations. So while broadcaster investment obligations have existed for a long time, there are fairly new obligations now involving streamers as well across Europe. And we don't have specific data on the impact of these obligations, but we can have a look at France as a case study. So data from the CNC in France suggests that streamer investment obligations are slowly showing an impact, with streamers now appearing in the financing plans of French films in increasing proportions. Now you need to keep in mind that France can be a particular as a case study because it has a specific regulatory measures in place. And that's all that I will say regarding investment obligations, because the Audiovisual Media Services Directive is currently under revision, and we will see how it evolves in the coming months and years. Now, the market is changing, the support side has been evolving as well, and these trends, they are also visible in the financing structures of European films. So we had a look at the average financing plan of a European film and how it has evolved over time. And here we can see two things. First, direct public funding has been stagnating or slowly decreasing, while production incentives have been increasing in the financing of European films. There are several differences according to the market size in Europe. So incentives play a larger role in large markets, while direct public funding is more significant in medium and small markets, as you can see here on the slide. Now, the effect of investment obligations is not yet visible in the financing plans that we've analyzed, mostly because we only have data on film financing until 2023. And up until 2023, streamers played no significant role in the financing of theatrical films. The French data that I showed earlier was more recent and sees an impact, so we will have to see if we can track a similar development in future research. If we were to see the effect of investment obligations within the financing structures, it would either be in the other category, which includes VOD investments, through broadcaster investments for broadcaster investment obligations, or in direct public funding through levies, which would finance film agencies that in turn finance theatrical films. One thing that is interesting to note on this graph is that we can clearly see that broadcaster financing has been under pressure, as I was mentioning earlier, and that it has reduced over time since 2016. So to conclude, public financing is essential for European films. When we are adding to direct public funding and production incentives the public service broadcasters, they represented an average 62% of European film financing in 2023, particularly as we've seen in small and medium markets. And within public financing, incentives do stand out as they have been the ones driving the growth. And now my colleague Sophie Vallet will study incentives and their policy goals in further details. And I'll let her join me on the stage. Thank you.
So good morning, everyone. We've just looked at the market figures and the important role of incentives in production financing. Let's shift now a bit the perspective and try to answer the question of why. Why are public authorities investing so heavily in incentives? What policy objectives are they trying to achieve? And how have these objectives evolved over time? Are we just trying to attract shoots, or are we trying to serve more targeted ambitions? And if so, how are these objectives designed in the incentives themselves? Finally, as these systems have expanded across Europe, what benefits are we seeing, and also what challenges are beginning to emerge? So rather than just looking at incentives as financial tools, let's try to look at them for what they really are: policy instruments shaped by choices, priorities, but also trade-offs. Let's dive into that together. So incentives, as we have seen now many times, are just one pillar among the two others: public direct funding and legal obligations. It's important to keep this in mind and to see that incentives don't operate in isolation. It's the combination of these three pillars that really sustains a dynamic, competitive European audiovisual sector. So why are governments incited to create such tools? To answer that, let's go back in the past. The first incentive started in Canada in the 90s. The goal was clear at the time. It was to build domestic capacity and to attract large international production, especially from Hollywood. And it worked. It worked actually so well that it triggered competitions. And a few years later, US states created their own incentives to keep the production, the jobs, and the spending on their own soil. In Europe, it started in 1999 with Ireland, Section 481, and the ambition was a bit broader already at the time. It was not just attracting production, but also promoting culture, language, and creative talents. And that dual ambition has really defined the European approach ever since. So today, incentives serve both cultural and economic goals. Cultural as supporting storytelling, national voices, linguistic diversity, cultural expression, but also driving the industry through job skills, infrastructure, and investment. So from the producer's perspective, the logic is quite simple. If you reduce the cost of producing locally, suddenly a territory becomes much more attractive. And for public authorities, there is also a direct interest because the effect of incentives goes beyond the production sector. It touches upon transport, tourism, restaurants, and the entire ecosystem. So that's why incentives are really strategic policy tools. And they're still evolving. New targeted specific goals are put in place in some countries, and we see now incentive targeting the support to independent production or lower budget productions. You can have incentive more dedicated to attract private capital, promoting diversity, inclusion, and sustainability in some cases. So understanding where they come from help us also understanding where they are going. But incentives such as direct public funding are state aid, so as such they need to comply with certain rules, competition rules at European level. Actually these rules are based, the justification for state aid in the audiovisual sector is based on legitimate grounds for culture. So the film and audiovisual production sector isn't seen as purely economic. It's about identity, language diversity, and that's why state aid in this sector are allowed. They must, however, go through an assessment by the European Commission through the cinema communication to ensure that they don't distort the market. However, there are some exemptions. So for certain smaller amounts of aid below 300,000 euros per company over 3 years, you don't need to go through this whole process of assessment and notification. And the same happens with the GBER exemption, with the General Block Exemption Regulation, which allows certain cultural aid schemes without prior approval if some conditions are met. So in the end, it's a balancing act between competition and culture and between national ambition and European cohesion. And that balance shapes also how incentives are designed today. So once the EU sets the rule, how do these incentives work in practice? For producers, this is not a detail because it's about when the money comes in and how. Alors, first, we have different types of incentive. We have tax credits. This reduces a producer's tax bill. They can be refundable. In such case, they can generate cash back, and they can even be sold for liquidity, although generally at a cost through an intermediary. Then we have cash rebates. These are simple in principle. A percentage of local spending is reimbursed, but timing is key here, as payments usually come after the costs are audited. So producers need to bridge the gap with upfront financing. Then there are tax shelters, and here the logic shifts. Instead of supporting producers directly, the system incentivizes private investors. So one final point is who managed the scheme? Is it the tax authority? Is it the film fund, another cultural body? And this can make a big difference, as it means also it has an impact in terms of speed, predictability, and access to the funds. And we find in some countries a hybrid administration of these schemes. So these are not technical details, they're actually strategic for producers as it can shape the entire financing structure of a project. Now, once you have the type of incentive, the next question becomes how do you design it? Because this is where policy becomes strategy. Across Europe, the fine print, threshold caps, eligibility rules makes all the difference. These choices determine who benefits and what kind of production gets made. If you take thresholds and caps, if you set them high, you will target large international production, such as in the Czech Republic with a rebate going from 25 to 35%. If you lower them, you open the door to smaller domestic projects, like in Ireland, which combine accessibility entry points with enhanced credits to support domestic production. Some countries aim for balance, like, for example, in Italy, with tax credits with a cap prep project to support production. Others go further, using incentives to drive new priorities. As I mentioned, for example, sustainability becomes one objective that we can find in incentives, such as in Portugal, where there is an enhanced rate for sustainable productions. Then come eligibility rules. Who can apply, under what conditions? In the UK, access is limited to original or delegate producers combined with a cultural certification process of the BFI. In France, there are two systems differentiating between international production and domestic production with specific provisions for independent producers. We can see also some differences, for example, in the type of works which are targeted, like in Austria, where you can have schemes for targeting films or films and TV. Among all these criteria, one key element remains, which is the cultural test, ensuring a genuine link to national or European culture. So as we can see, when we look closely, these schemes are far from being uniform. They are very calibrated tools used to balance culture, ambition, economic impact, and increasingly broader goals like sustainability. So as these schemes evolve over Europe, the key question is how do we strike this right balance? On the one hand, what we can see is that incentives seem to work. They attract international production, they bring in investment, they fuel industry growth. But on the other hand, they come with trade-offs. We're seeing increasing competition between countries, sometimes a race to offer more, rising costs also, and a growing pressure for a domestic and independent production. And there is a deeper question underneath all these: who really benefits in the long term? Are local skills developing fast enough? Is infrastructure keeping pace? Is intellectual property staying in the territory? Because attracting production is one thing and capturing lasting value is another. So that's why incentives can't precisely operate in isolation. They need to work hand in hand with broader policy tools, because in the end, success isn't about offering the most generous incentives, but offering the smartest one. So I will leave you with this question because I'm sure you have many thoughts on this. To conclude, I invite you to read our new report from the legal policy angle to go more in depth into this question. It has been published yesterday, and you can find it on our website under the section Legal Reports. And next week, there will be a proper communication on the networks. Thank you very much.
So we have now set the scene, and I'm happy to pass the floor to Martin Kanzler for opening the panel, and I'm joined them. I sat down to leave space for being seen the slides.
Thank you very much to Sophie and Elisa for introducing the topic of incentives in the wider policy context. And in the first part of the panel discussion, I would like to stay in this wider context. When I listened to Sophie's presentation, it mentioned that in theory, it seems incentives can be used for anything to promote cultural diversity, sustainability, diversity and inclusion. Is that in practice how they are being used, or in reality it is still that direct public funding would be the tool of choice to promote cultural diversity and artistic quality of films, whereas incentives are primarily used to attract spending in the country? And my first question would be to Edith, representing a film fund from a small country. How do you see this?
Thank you. Very impressive work what you have done. Thank you. The EEO is always very correct in the numbers and, showing us the way further and future. But what I wanted to say that I don't know we can really choose between we can't choose automatic and selective. It's a comprehensive ecosystem, and it contains both sides. I would put culture always first, since I am representing here the small national film fund, and then I would talk about economy. However, it has to be combined, and we have to see it as a comprehensive ecosystem for all. And why? Because the selective scheme is really important for European film to take the risks. And I think selective scheme can do it. We can take down the pressure from the market and have this type of European cutting-edge directors doing the way they want to create the film. It's always about the authors when it comes to European films, for us anyway, for smaller industries and for Estonia. I think it's also about the language and reflecting the cultural stories on the screen. So I can't point out more than the culture comes first. However, saying all that, we can't really deny the economic impact. And where does the money come from? So while we are taking the risk, we really need to cooperate with the players on the market. And as you could see from the numbers, and you could see that it's declining how much national funds can really put into the selective schemes. So in Estonia, for example, what we are trying to do, and it's quite unusual because the cash rebate and the selective schemes, they are under the same institutions, under the Estonian Film Institute, and we try very unusually to balance, how much money we are giving to the national cinema and how much money we are giving the cash rebate. It's not usually cash rebate incentives, they are way beyond, that's much bigger budget, because politicians, they do understand when we're talking about the economy, the economic growth, and as it was mentioned also that it does support the entire local economy, tourism, hotels, caterings, everything. So they do look at the benefits of the economy, and usually, and especially today in this changing world, we talk less about our stories and our culture. So we, as a public funding and as a national smaller funds, we have to constantly remind what is the essence here. So we in Estonia, coming back, we keep it under the same umbrella. And fortunately, at the moment, we have a minister who is seeing that the balance is always the key to keep industry alive. And I would say Estonian local industry alive. You have to balance the two schemes. You can't put more money, or you can obviously, to the cash rebate, but then the local have to benefit from this system as well. In Estonia, unfortunately, the cash rebate is not open to the local investments, not yet. It's very good that I have the Vice Secretary General in the hall from the Ministry of Culture in Estonia. So I can say here in front of the international public that we do really need to treat everybody equally.
She's teasing you.
You think?
Yes, yeah, fantastic.
Anyway, so it is keeping it balanced is very important. And the other thing what I would like to bring out, and it was also mentioned in the presentation, is the continuity. You know, we need to have long-term plans. Again, if I come back to Estonia, we have 1 year state budgets. So every year we decide how much money we're going to give in the next year. And it doesn't really work. And you need to have a longer plan. And a successful film has long plan. So second point to the minister. But to conclude, and I could obviously talk lengthily here, I think we can't also stop the developing of the industry, that, you know, we do have to engage into the new players on the market more. We have to be more friendly and not so much in conflict with the platforms and broadcasters sometimes. So we sort of really, in order for European film to survive, for example, the incentives, what we are doing, or cash rebates, the money what is coming in, we have to think also about the distributing these projects. It's not about only putting money into the production, but it is what is going to happen to these films later on. So if we are benefiting from the production and we are supporting our companies in the production, we have to link them also to the distributing European films, not only inside Europe, but also outside Europe. But we'll come back to that one, I guess.
Thank you, Edith. So if I understood correctly, you still see a distinctive role for selective funding and for incentives, and there needs to be the right balance between the two.
Wasn't that clear enough? So,
yes. I'm
so therefore, I stand for culture.
Just recapping. And linking to my next question to Peter. Now, Germany is one of the largest European markets. Does the same logic apply also in the largest markets? And perhaps you could link it to Germany just recently had a major structural reform where selective funding was partly shifting to reference-based automatic funding, and the cash rebates were strengthened in a significant manner. Perhaps you could elaborate a bit on the rationale behind this and what you're hoping to achieve with it.
Yes, of course I can, and I will. And surprisingly, we have the same idea. Maybe not surprisingly, maybe it's just funding logic. So to answer your question, yes, I could sign almost every word. It's a question of ecosystem. It's, yeah, I would say incentives are not the enemy of a cultural film policy. They should be their servant. And the alignment is the big question in every funding system. And how we align it strategically might indeed be a little bit more different or different in bigger, larger markets than in smaller markets. Smaller markets have the tendency, to strengthen their cultural voice, their cultural identity, their language. So they might shift in the balance of the systems more in selective funding, but always taking incentives as a basis, as capacity building, as necessary for the structure also cultural films use. And so it's a provision to have a, I would say, flourishing film industry to combine both. And in larger countries, it's logical. You have larger industry, you have larger capacities, you have to keep them alive, you have to keep them nourished, and so it's also logical that you are what depends on capacity building and automatic systems and incentives, you emphasize them more, because it's all about resilience. It's about resilience of your own structures in times of, I would say, a volatile market. It's about employment in a large market. It's about skills that arrive in a large market. And this idea of capacity building of incentives is absolutely crucial for a cultural film policy in a large market, because this is the basis for everything else. So when we try to recalibrate our system, we are in the middle of a film reform, almost finished right now, and I could say it has 3 pillars. Nobody understood in the past why we have 2 federal systems in Germany in competition to each other, partners, friends, but however in competition. And finally, after decades, we terminated this competition, and now we have, I would say, a common roof with a common understanding and a common film funding. We fund together, we fund as partners, we are specialized like 2 puzzle stones with different funding tools. And so the funding institution on the government side in Germany has been part of a merger. And this is new. This is less bureaucracy, this is faster, this is service-driven to the producers and speaking with one voice, not with 2 anymore. First pillar. Second pillar, the cash rebate side. DFFF, most of you might know it, the traditional system in Germany since 2007. We recalibrated it. It's now a 30% rebate that we have, and we also have, I would say, 3 different pillars: national rebate, audiovisual and series rebate, and international rebate. And 30% on everything, local spend. And furthermore, it's, I would say, very easy. It's a typical traditional system as we always had it in Germany, but we doubled it. It's now 250 million euros. And I would say this is an offer to the producers, to service production, and we hope that this offer will work out and will be successful. And the third pillar is an investment obligation of 8% with an opt-out option. If you spend more than 12%, you can free yourself in negotiations with the producer association to get less severe ride-sharing provisions or ride-sharing conditions or less severe subquotas, so you can escape the system by the motivation to pay more. This is the idea behind. It's on the table. It's not finalized yet. It's in a public hearing, and we will have it, I hope, for the 1st of January 2027. That's the overall view on it, the 3 pillars of the film reform. That's it.
Just a very brief question to both Edith and Peter before I come to the people who actually produce the films. Would you say that over the recent years, the prioritization of policy goals has changed, or has it remained the same and just the usage of the tools is changing?
So it depends what term you look at. I began my job 23 years ago. You had no incentives at this time. The DFFF was developed in 2007 with 50 million euros. Today it's 250 million euros. This is a development. Between 2022 and 2026, we spent 350 million euros to attract 6 billion euros. This is a leverage of 5.8. So it changed. The whole system shifted and developed more and more incentive funding, which actually is a good idea. Because this automatic funding gives a floor of, in former days, 25%, today 30% to production in our country or coming from outside. It's about predictability. It's part of the architecture of your own calculation, of your, I would say, your production architecture. And this is necessary nowadays, this kind of predictability. And maybe a small point besides, automatic systems have also a very important side effect in those days. If I look at the resilience of institutions in a, I would say, publicly very tense situation, then I would say juries in selective funding can easily be attacked. They can be criticized for their, I would say, pretended political view on films. And this can easily happen. If it is an automatic system, and you give the creative freedom to producers to express their voices, their creativity, the institutions are much more resilient against political attacks. This might be a minor point, but I see it as an important point in those days.
Interesting, you know, I feel like we are giving the responsibility to the producers, you know, instead of doing it ourselves if we are becoming more automatic. Like selective schemes in smaller countries, and where I'm talking about how it's changing and the focus, how the focus has changed. I think in the selective schemes, we do still kind of become into the creators as a partner. You know, we help them to create. It's a small market, and knowledge is spread. So, you know, in the selective schemes where the committees, and also in Estonia, the committees are working to support the creators. I think it's not like we are making the hard decision who gets the money, who doesn't get the money. It's that we are together with the producers and the creators pushing the project forward to make it better together. It's not it's not putting some kind of criteria that you should do one way or another. So this was a comment only to Peter, and now I'm going to talk how he has changed. I think the biggest change is we should talk about the independent producers. I think we used to, like even 15 years ago, or when I started, we used to support projects, independent projects. And maybe we should have to start look into the independent companies instead of the projects. And this is a bigger shift, and I think we really have to build our companies, independent companies in Europe, and not support as the automatic schemes or the intensive are doing, that they're supporting projects, but project doesn't create and doesn't sustain the entire ecosystem in countries. And this is a huge problem. So I think this is the biggest change, that perhaps our mental state and our thinking has to shift from the project to the production companies, to the ecosystem. This is what would be my message. Can
I move to Estonia?
Yeah, we'll talk about it later.
Yes. Thank you very much, and apologies to the other panelists. You will have your time now. Just with regard to policy goals, could I ask all of you, starting with Philip, what do you, from a personal and or professional perspective, think should be the one or two primary policy goals that are being pursued, and how?
No, I think I was about to add a little bit what was now said by the predecessors, that or opened the topic of what I see as a producer, that selective system can have certain limits in terms of creating, let's say, taste and topic matrices, and it's object of very long discussions always, how the system should be set up, and we have been experiencing that always in our country, you know, talking what kind of films should be supported, what kind of projects, and until this is solved, you know, the world is somewhere else, and we are behind. So I am in a favor of certain level of automatization, although not objecting of what was said, and that the system needs to be balanced. And of course, it is very important to support especially the projects which are, let's say, artistically complex, or they are created by new coming directors, and probably there will be more reasons where the selective support can focus and for what is important. And but at the same time, the automatic support or intensive incentives, they create kind of additional support for private investment and for what was said, for the will and creativity of the producers themselves, because the producers and production companies should be the ones who are taking the responsibility for the creativity. It should not be, let's say, dramaturgical point of view of the committees who are deciding what films should be made or not. And this, I think, has been happening many times in this industry, and some countries can overlap it better or overcome it better, some not. And so we have been trying in Czech Republic to balance the automatic system and the incentives quite nicely. It is not exactly true that it's focused in Czech Republic on incoming productions. We have been actually, as a producers, very much patient or objecting or taking care of that the system works also for local production. And it's helping nowadays a lot to the producers to keep the IP or keep the control over the project and co-produce with broadcasters and with other partners. And I think this is not exactly what we have in the Czech Republic, but we have been discussing that maybe part of the incentives should be directed to the, let's say, producers who keep IP or create the projects, or maybe that can be higher incentive, the automatic incentives on that kind of projects than on a typical service production, which is just incoming to the country. That I think it would be, and it exists in some countries that the incentives are much more related to IP or to the projects created by the producers. So that's maybe the good tool to use.
Thank you. Carlo?
Well, hello. Before I answer your question, I would like to put our, our discussion a little bit in perspective. No? A couple of examples. So between 2021 and 2023, so 3 years, the countries in the European Union invested about 250 billion euros in the fossil fuel industry. Between 2021 and 2027, so 6 years, same countries allocated 2.44 billion to the audiovisual sector. 250 billion in 3 years, less than 2.5 over 6 years. So it looks like no one seems particularly troubled when we pour our money in an industry, private industry, that generates aberrant profits, destroys the planet, and helps sustain violent regimes. But when we come to funding the audiovisual industry, the nourishment of our collective identity, then we start making distinction and asking ourselves why, tiptoeing. Let me give you another example about Germany, you know very well. At some point, the former government, there was a discussion between the environment minister and the finance minister, no? The finance minister said, no, we cannot sustain your green agenda. Fight, fight, fight. The government crumbled. New government, the day after, they announced 1 trillion investment in armaments, something like that. So it's okay, and we find money to slaughter each other, but it's a problem to find money to live together. So this is what we are talking about. To me, sorry, I'm a bit naive. I grew up in a farm. No, it's true. So then, coming to your question, sorry. But I'm furious. I think we should be furious. I would like to, for a second, I don't see much difference between, from a certain point of view, between automatic and selective incentives, because both shape our industry. I I don't like the distinction between cultural and not cultural and stuff like that. Take automatic investments. If they are automatic, they are based on the size of a budget. So more money, public money, goes to bigger budgets. More money goes to big companies. And this is incremental. They will grow bigger and bigger to the detriment to smaller companies. So we all like to talk about ecosystem, but an ecosystem sustains on biodiversity. An ecosystem is powerful and resilient if it is diverse. So if it can provide different solutions to, changing situations. If we create larger and larger companies, we, almost automatically will have a less diverse ecosystem. Let's think about incentives as procurement. Incentives is the state buying stuff for me, right? The state buys medical equipment, railroads, highways, and more, and they buy something like the important audiovisual industry. So let's figure it out in terms of biodiversity and start thinking about them as leverage for innovation. Make sense? Yeah, that's it. No, but I think we'll come on it later on. It would be interesting to start talking about metrics.
We'll come to that.
We'll come to it.
Since you're moving to Estonia, can you become a policy advisor?
Absolutely. Do you pay well?
Well, we talk about it.
Yeah, it's okay.
Philippine, from Amazon perspective. It just works.
At Amazon, our streaming service, Prime Video, relies heavily, not only, but heavily on its exclusive and original slate of film and audiovisual content. So on both legs of international and local content, local is very important to us. We localize our offer in Europe. So we have a French offering, a German offering, an Italian offering, etc. For this local and exclusive content, we invest across a wide variety of genre and across a wide range of budgets. So from small budget and experimental works to blockbusters and everything in between. And for all of these works, the public support, the incentives support the production from the start. And so it's definitely, for us a need. When we are from the start supporting a European project, we will be able to make the best choices from an artistic, from a technical standpoint. The ability to rely on incentives will help us, go as far as possible to serve the creative ambition. So for this, it's very important to keep in mind this ability to serve the vision, and for works that come to us after an initial development stage. So, for instance, when we invest in an independent production, in many cases, the work would not have reached us without the initial public support and the certainty to be able to benefit from incentives. So to respond on the question of is there a need for incentives? Well, yes, without incentives, some works cannot be developed at all and do not reach our teams, and other works would be less funded and would be less ambitious from a creative and technical standpoint. So yeah, for us it's very important to be able to support both the small, the most risk-taking projects, and also to support the more maybe commercially successful projects, but that will be more ambitious and that will create a lot of impact also economically during filming.
Thank you, Philippine. So to conclude the round on the policy goals part, Marianne.
Thank you. First of all, I must say that I'm so glad to be part of this conversation. I assume that everyone in this room, when we get up in the morning, we want to create content that open up hearts and minds, entertain and strengthen the democracy. So I'm all with you, Carlo. By saying so, from a public service perspective, in one way we need both. And I think it's about having, many thoughts in our mind at the same time. And that's why these conversations, and that we can be so transparent and trying to find new ways, new frameworks to work, so we can create this content that will change the world to a better place. We need to explore together. But for us in Norway and UK, we invest accordingly in regard with our strategy and our audience needs. But that also means that we are dependent, or the production companies, our producers are dependent on both schemes. And I think it's funny that me and my, how can I put it, more commercial colleague over here share some of the same joys and challenges, because there are some large TV shows that are, incentives are their only public funding. When it comes to the dramedy, comedy, kids and teenage stuff, they're not getting public funding as much as others. So I think it's about trying to acknowledge that we need to see the whole scope. Was that a conclusion for you, Martin?
I think it was, and it was quite fascinating to see the wide spectrum of perspectives, but still landing on a common ground, which is we need the stories, we need money to build them, but we need the authors. That was you, particularly Edith, mentioning that. It starts with the authors, the producers, they have to follow the creativity, but the money comes with. So we have been through the theory. Now I would like to go a bit to the ground and start with you two producers, Carol and Philippe, to see in your daily work, how do traditional direct funding and incentives work respectively? Do they affect your work in a different way? Is it more or less the same? It is just a package of the budget tool, or how do you perceive it? Do you want to start, Philippe?
I can.
Yeah.
I think I've tried to point that already in my previous talk. Both are important, but automatic way of supporting gives more, let's say, certainty to the producer, and that's something what he can count on with in the financing. And as Marianne just said, it was also not all the genres or all kind of films or series are being like it or basically in the policy of the funds to be co-financed by the selective support. So I personally try to work with both, but it's also, let's say, I think it's beneficial for the territories because it's in different countries, even the selective support, they are managed differently. And I think where even the selective support counts a little bit more on the quality of the producer, of the team itself. And it's not really that much about reading the scripts and doing a dramaturgy of the scripts on the side of the funds, which, if I remember well, Austrian system, they had some of the funds which actually says we don't read scripts. They look at the whole package rather than on the script itself. I'm not pushing the whole system and that everything should be exactly like that. But I see it, just what I wanted to point out, that it's good to have the most responsibility in the hands of the producer, because that's the one who should be responsible for the product he is actually trying to sell to his partners, and he should deliver. And if he's not delivering, he's not going to do the next project. So I think that's the first system.
Carlo, do you feel the same kind of ownership with regard as a producer?
Yeah, I think so. What it would be interesting, it would be to elevate the conversation on both sort of investments. When we talk about selective, it would be important for us as producers, to understand what sort of vision, what sort of mission the state has by investing this money. What do you want from us? You know, I think that Peter, outlined a few pillars, and this is very, very important, no? You know, what you want from us. And regarding automatic investments, I think that, as I mentioned before, they should be used to, help innovation. Let me mention 2-3 points. You should not receive automatic investment if the IP does not stay with the original producer. Not because, you are singing for your own, because you're an independent producer, original producer, you want to keep. No, the fact is that if I am deprived as an original producer, if I am deprived of my IP, I lose the capacity to grow my company. Full point. There's no discussion. Second, let's use automatic investments for work on gender gap pay, which is nonsense. We're still paying men more. We're paying men more than women. What is that? Who came up with this idea? It's just stupid. Come on. So you cannot have a penny of a tax credit incentive if you don't start with a serious policy of, sorting out that problem, which is like not. I think that in whatever serious, measurable, auditable environmental sustainability schemes, not greenwashing. And the word here is auditable, right? Protocols that can be audited by, of course, third parties. Disability inclusion. You cannot touch a penny of blah, blah, blah if you don't have a disability and minority inclusion scheme. So these are procurement, and procurement are made to change society. Let's use them to change our industry.
So if I understand well, incentives, they are okay insofar as they are bundled with these conditions. I see you have an urge to reply.
I just wanted to add to it that we have, because you asked how it's influencing our daily life, we have incentives available only for independent producers in the Czech Republic. So this increases totally, either they are servicing companies, so it brings the money to them, to the Czech industry, to the local industry, even through the incoming productions. Or it also helps with collaborations with, for example, broadcasters, where now most of the production is basically done with the independent producers, especially fiction production, because they are the only ones who can bring in the incentives. And Carlos said, because he was talking here about the incentives and IP, I actually agree, and I think it's a very good tool to have certain automatic incentives to be related to the IP retention, but at the same time, I want to defend a little bit the servicing industry because we have done a lot of studies in the Czech Republic by really renowned, known agencies from KPMG and many different ones, and it really basically creates economic value for the industry. I mean, it multiplicates heavily the money and the which are invested in the incentives itself. So the state doesn't lose, actually just gain the money. We can talk about the ratio between 1.6 to 2, or maybe sometimes more, depends on the production, how the invested euro, 1 euro in the incentives is coming back to the state through different taxes and through the spendings in the country.
Carlos seems to disagree.
No, are you kidding? No, who paid KPMG for that study?
While Philip thinks about it, I move over.
We wanted to have the incentives, Carlo, you know.
Philip mentioned broadcasters, so I would like now to go to Marianne. Public service broadcaster is also producing and putting own money at risk as well, but still collecting funds from incentives. So same personal question from you. How do you see these funding schemes with regard to your daily life in NRK?
Well, this first of all goes to the production companies and the producers, I must say. You know, we invest, as I said earlier, accordingly to our needs and our strategies. But when it comes to it, if the production company isn't able to greenlight it, we don't have a show to air, you know. So we are part of the same ecosystem in many ways. And in Norway now, there is a debate going on. There is a group calling themselves No-Brainers, who believes that the incentive has to go to the Ministry of Trade, not under the Culture Department. Because as you said also, Philippe, from 1 Norwegian kroner that is invested in incentive, 4.7 Norwegian kroner comes back to the creative economy, the industry, and so on. And also 2 Norwegian kroners go back to taxes. So there is a debate now going on whether, you know, where it should be. And again, you know, it's not a part of my daily life, but it has some consequences. And when we see that, because we are a minor country compared to the others here, it's 87.5 is the annual gap. In 25, I believe it was almost 200 applications for almost 285, 300 million Norwegian kroners. It means that there is an uncertainty in the business, in the industry. 1 out of 3 television, fiction, film workers has quit because there is a challenge in the fact that there is a vulnerability in the stability. And that means that it does something with the profession, with the skills, I mean, I must also say that I think it's great that international productions comes to Norway as well, because it creates competence. And we need that, in especially small countries. But again, we have to see this as a whole, because we are everyone a little part of it, and the ones who's going to suffer is our shared audience.
Mm. So it's a package. It comes with risks as well, indeed. Package investments. Now I turn to you, Philippine. Amazon is a big investor. So how does this work when you plan your investments? You mentioned you go locally and globally. Let's go locally and look at how you think of your investment plans and how you choose your investments according to the incentives. Does this influence your daily life?
I would say that it always starts with an author, director, creator, and so it's always first the creative project, and then we will think about how we finance it, where, and so it does not start with selecting a country because of its incentive scheme. It doesn't work that way. And so once we reach that point of having to select the location for filming, well, there are a range of things to consider. It's not just the incentives, it's the local pool of talents, the production companies we will work with, the technicians, of course, and so yeah, cast, crew, everything. And so incentives are a part of the overall equation, a very important one, because as I mentioned, we need to maximize our ability to reach the creative ambition, but we really need to have in mind that it's an overall equation of the ecosystem that needs to cross the boxes, and so it's not just...
I think Marianne wants to react.
Yeah, just may I add as well that it's of course important for us when we invest and we commission that we maintain the local IP and the local talent. And just a thought here, a reflection from the broadcaster. Of course, it is of a big value for us that we maintain that talent and that professionalism also within the local industry and the IP. So we must think, as I said earlier, with many thoughts in our mind, that if we are allowing just international big industries, you know, as a part of the incentive scheme, using, not and being a part of the shows that we are commissioning, there's also a consequence for our local IP and our local talent. And of course the green thing, but we'll come back to that with the metrics, because the Nordics is going there, yeah.
Great.
Maybe to get back on the question of impact in our daily life. So at Amazon, we, as I said, incentives benefit our international productions filmed in Europe and our local productions, independent or Amazon studios. But in no case do we directly benefit. It's always the European production partner. And so when we hear about it in our daily life, it's because there is a problem. It's when the production partner tells us, oh, actually, we did not get the subsidy or the tax incentive as planned. And so all this to say, predictability, clarity of criteria, and certainty are extremely important because when suddenly there is an unexpected gap in a budget, I think all of you know that it can cause a big problem. Yeah.
Well, so there we have the investor soul indeed coming back. I want to close this round with Edith and Peter, just with some keywords. You have listened to the producers, to the service providers. How do you, from your perspective, see the main effects that incentives produce? 2 positive effects each. And then I pass over to you, Martin.
Positive effects only.
Now positive, then Martin will do the negative.
Takes me ages to think about that. But the positive effects is obviously that we keep our industries competitive, you know, because in the smaller industries it's a huge problem. You know, we don't put enough money into the industry to, via the national cinema, to keep them at work. You know, they're not working, the competitiveness is dropping, and, you know, incentives are giving us the world of the view of the world in Estonia, you know. And if you have Christopher Nolan or, you know, George Clooney coming to Estonia, it basically changes our lives, you know, in every single level. But it's great. But I think we have to keep it in mind also that in Estonia the problem was the inflation was so high, and we were very happy. We are very happy to increase our percentage to 40%, but it is going to have an effect on the Estonian local production, and we can't deny that. So I can't talk about positive if I can't talk about negative. So I'm just going to go into this, because the thing is that with the incentives, we are overproducing. You know, we do have to realize that we are overproducing, and the small industries like us, Estonian films, we are losing our audience, you know, because the money is in the production. You know, we produce, but what is going to happen to this content? So still talking about negative here is that, you know, we don't, for example, put any constraints or any levies or any investment obligations to the YouTube. But it's a big circle. Again, it's the same ecosystem. The small films, you know, with all this content, what is available in TikTok, in YouTube, and if we don't make them part of our financing system, we are going to lose out. You know, who is going to watch our diverse cinema? But we were just talking about it. So incentives, yes, we keep working, we keep producing, we keep the content creation. But then again, we have to see the bigger picture. We have to put more into where you can see European content around the world. We have to be more aggressive, like platforms are, like streamers are. You know, they're all around the world. But we are still struggling here inside Europe. But we should really have a vision to promote ourselves forcefully outside Europe. Make Europe great again.
The MIGA, yeah. Thanks, Edith. And Peter, do you have some positives or only negatives?
Oh, I have a lot of positives.
Two
it's
of
a
them.
choice which is difficult.
Just two.
So I will choose two, as you suggested. First is employment and capacity building, because for me this is very important. It's a very subjective approach, because I learned from the members of the German Film Academy how bad the industry is really going at the time being. And there are people really wanting to leave the system, to getting a teacher whatsoever, because they say, I don't earn enough money, I have no more employment, I have nothing anymore if the system doesn't run. And so from a very subjective point of view, because I met so many people, employment and capacity building, this is one. And the second, because I'm here in Cannes, it's internationalization, because we open our systems with automatic funding, with incentives, and we have almost 37% co-productions in our incentives, and I think this is great, and this suits perfectly to Cannes. Thank you.
Martin.
I think that was very clear and does not need to be summed up, and we can continue with what Edith already started, and I'd like to do really just one or two keywords about potential or real negative effects of incentives. Edith mentioned overproduction, and I'd like to do the round, apart from Edith, and then we'll choose which is the most interesting one to talk about. Perhaps Carlo, let's start with you this time.
Negative. Yeah, there is that what I mentioned before. that there is that automatic incentives create a conglomeration and a concentration of decision power. Big companies growing bigger and bigger, and small companies. One. No, it was one.
Or two.
Oh, okay. I'll come. If I think about it, I pass it. No, there is a thing, but it's about overproduction. I think that what we need is a change of mentality very quickly, because I don't think that cinema is part of the attention warfare. Okay.
But we'll discuss afterwards.
Okay.
It's just to collect the topics.
Okay.
Philip.
I think overproduction can be the topic indeed, but it depends, how high is the incentive and exactly how it's structured, and also especially on the beginning when it's introduced, so it creates a certain disbalance, as was said, or increase in the costs on the market, which can influence the local producers. But I think it over the time it finds the balance. I don't think we have this problem anymore in the Czech Republic. Of course, sometimes as a producers we feel that we don't have enough capacities, or we are looking for people desperately for our projects because they are on some big international project, and suddenly the project leaves, and there is a lot of people in the market. But in the end of the day, the positives are much more higher and bigger than the negatives. And from our history experience, we had a period when we didn't have incentives, and they were introduced already in the countries surrounding Czech Republic. And the production in general, it dropped from 5 to 9. So it's impossible to live without incentive nowadays, especially in this world, which is every country almost has an incentive. And as I said, there are also economical benefits to it, so why not to have it?
Philippine?
So negative effects or aspects, I would say inconsistency within the broader system of financing production. So we need to make sure everything is properly aligned, obviously, to achieve the cultural policy goals, and it's not always the case. So consistency is essential. And another negative aspect would be, well, as I said, lack of certainty sometimes, or unclear criteria.
Yeah, well, from a broadcast perspective, if we talk about incentives when a Norwegian show goes to another country to produce, NRK, we have a mandate to support the industry and the Norwegian local industry and Norwegian local culture. That's in our mandate. And if our shows are being produced everybody else's, it becomes a problem. Or it's something to talk about, at least. Yeah. And another thing is that the local rates, of course, goes up when big international shows or studios come to small countries as Norway, and it shows on the budgets for our local shows. Again, the consequences is that it's less shows to invest in and less shows for our audience when it comes to financing and budgeting.
So the main problematic aspects that were mentioned were overproduction, plus an increase or pressure on cost in the country, and you hinted at a competition between countries, right? To
yes,
move,
yes.
for productions to move.
And I shall not go in and sort of, but it's something to talk about, and it's something to do with also the mandate from a public broadcaster perspective as well.
And maybe also I add also to producers that the money is in the production. This is, you already want to take a next project, and these incentives really help you to keep the money in the production. But the main problem is that you don't really think, what is going to happen with this product. If we are doing what films, the budget, what is circling our industry is 2 billion. We're not watching the films worth 2 billion on every year, do we? So where are all these films? You know, where to see them? So I think it's this is also to do with the incentives. I don't say, sorry, that I'm against incentives. You know, Estonian Film Estonia is, yeah, it's not. But it just perhaps, you know, since so much money is in incentives, to link it where we can see these products later on. Did you hear products, not films, even? You know.
But just a small technical note. One of the tools how to limit this is also to put the minimums, you know, what kind of projects you support. That's what we have. You know, we are not supporting everything. We are supporting from certain level of the budget, which should somehow also guarantee certain quality. It's not really for every small little thing and project. So, but I agree. Basically, I said the overproduction is
not for small things.
I don't mean small things like
small projects,
but you mentioned also like YouTube or small, you know, these, and we have a lot of movies being produced, like 60 almost every year in Czech Republic. Half of them they are not even worth to go to the cinema, or maybe more, you know. And but they are of course co-financed by this. Because, as you said, the money is in production. So here I agree with you.
Yeah, but I think we come to metrics now. No.
Not yet.
I have this metric thing that I like.
We'll get there.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that, you know, box office is not the only metrics. Success is not the only metrics of a successful public investment in a film.
Agreed. The question is, what else? But to conclude on that, Peter, you mentioned a lot of positive impacts. Do you see this competition? Do you see a competition between countries and some problem? I mean, yes, but how do you see that? Do you see that as problematic?
Yes, I see a competition between the countries, and first of all, competition is something good, because producers like when we compete. And if competition is something addressing, I would say, speed of the system, less administration, the professional way to handle such funds, getting faster, quality of supply, the conditions, the legal certainty, then I would say competition is something very good. But if we address the headline, I would say now 60% in Liechtenstein. I don't take any other country. So this is a bidding war. And then we spend more and more public money to attract productions for our countries competing with each other. And the leverage gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And the capacity effect that we wanted to will be more and more expensive. And this is not the way we should spend public money. This is here at least not my idea how to spend public money. And this is bad.
Then I think, so that we have more time to talk about metrics, I'll pass a word.
Yes, we will come to metrics. I wanted to ask one little question before that to Edith and Peter, being a large and a smaller country, and how they impact the balance between these three pillars, no? Selective, the incentives, and the investment obligations. Let's bring them to the stage. I mean, that's the complete package we need to look at. How they work with regard to the interaction between them in your countries. Is there a difference between large and small, or is this more or less indifferent? What's your perspective? You want to start, Peter, this time?
Yes, I think I already mentioned it maybe at the beginning. I said, well, I think there can be, it has not to be, a difference between smaller and bigger countries. We have both to align our systems. We have both to stabilize the ecosystem. We need both smaller and bigger countries, I would say, both elements. and we don't have only two elements in our funding system. At least in Germany, maybe also in Italy, there are important regional funding systems. They have their own job. There is automatical traditional funding, like in France, le système automatique, soutien automatique des films. These are pillars in a funding system to be brought in an ecosystem. And the problem or the challenge for bigger countries is they have a bigger capacity. So we have to spend more for the capacity to stabilize it, to make it more resilient in a volatile market. This is the idea behind. And in a smaller country, you maybe want to address more, I would say, your own voice, your own language, your own culture to make it visible. And this provides, I would say, always a selective choice. So the combination, the balance of both might be different in smaller and bigger countries. We have 200 million approximately in selective funding in Germany overall. We have 250 million in incentives, and we have approximately 70 million or 80 million in distribution. So this is the balance that we have at the time being, and we have to recalibrate it. I would say every year have a thoughtful look at it, and we have to evaluate it. That is a country's balance, a big country's, a large country's balance, actually approximately as you mentioned it in your study.
Thanks, Peter. And I wanted to add also a thing, since you talked about overproduction, Edith, and Peter now mentioned distribution. It's also being said that there are very little incentives for distribution parts and only for production. So let's put this into the loop as well. And so how do you see this now, smaller country? Did the description of Peter fit your match or not?
Yeah, you know, I totally echo what Peter said, and we do actually have also a regional fund. So it is the third pillar is also in Estonia, so you can get cash rebate, selective schemes, plus also the regional funds. As to investment obligations, Estonia is just introducing them, so we are a little bit late, but we are just working on that. So it's going to be the pillar to be added to the funding system in general. I don't know how to make cash rebate directly connected to the distribution schemes, but I think it's. I know, unfortunately, what you're going to ask also in the end of the panel, but I think it has to be very smart cash rebate and incentive system, you know, just to make, like, if we can put this criteria of keeping the IP. But this is what I take away from this panel today. If we can put this criteria into the cash rebate or incentive system, then I'm pretty sure we can work out also the incentive system for the distribution. You know, they have to be really linked. You know, I think I can't just express more that I think this is the danger, and we kind of really don't talk about it, that you know what is going to happen to distributing the European films. So I hope we are, the key word what I would like to point out is that smart incentives. You know, let's stay smart, also not losing totally our brains, you know, just to produce and produce and produce, but you know, just to get something out of it for our local interests, national cinema, European cinema.
You wanted to react?
No, I was just thinking about these incentives for distribution. I remember there were systems, I'm not aware of all the systems nowadays in every country, but for example in Spain in the past, I'm not sure how they have it now, they used to have automatic system, support system. It was for producers, but based on the results of their previous films in distribution. They were basically getting the money and they were reinvesting them into the new production. So I think it's important that it should not be incentive for like distributors, but maybe for producers and directed to production, but linked to distribution. This is just to raise the topic.
Yeah, the aim is still strengthen the independent films and independent production companies. So it's, the more decision making is in the producers, obviously it's better. It's just that we as policymakers, we can just coordinate it or, you know, help you through the regulation so that it's not only on somebody else's shoulders what the distributors are, but, you know, it is our common task, to make these films visible and travel.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you, Philippine, another aspect. What happens when incentives change? You talked about inconsistency or the risk of inconsistency. Does this have an impact on the big package between the various pillars for you? How do you react as Amazon to this?
Yeah, so in several member states, as you know, the system of production funding relies on several pillars. You have subsidies, incentives, etc., but also obligations. And these obligations are either investment obligations or levies or other sectoral taxes, like the CNC taxes, for instance, in France. And so mechanically, if you impact one of these pillars, well, the others will have to carry more of the weight of the funding system. So you really need to look at the virtuous circle, the overall ecosystem before lowering or reducing the criteria of incentives, because otherwise you risk creating an economic imbalance for the overall system. So it's
very clear. And Marianne, how do you live this, the balance between investment obligations, streamers' obligations, public funding, incentives, this package? Where do you see more or less the balance? And then we go to the metrics.
Well, again, the consequence for us is that if a production aren't able to greenlight, it won't happen. That's one thing. And of course, we are trying our best within our investment frame, to create as much as the best of content. But if the schemes or the incentives or so on aren't big enough as we want them to be, so we can create as much, of course that has a consequence. If that was an answer to your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's clear that there is like a marionette where you have the different threads that you hold.
Yes.
Yeah. So
we're a part of the ecosystem again.
Indeed. So metrics, Carlo, I think you will open, you will give me the pleasure of having you open this mini session in the session on metrics. How do we measure the effectiveness of these policy tools? What should be, let's say, the metrics that should be put in place in order to ensure that incentives are put in the right way in place?
I think it's a complex subject. A very respected Institute for Economic Studies at UCL, the Institute for Innovation Public Purpose, which is, by the way, directed by an Estonian economist, Rainer Kettel. They are now doing a study on how to figure out the value of a carnival, comparing different carnival, Brazil, Nottingham Carnival, other carnivals and stuff like that. So how do you measure the value of a carnival? Just by the number of sausages you sell or beer? Or it's what the creation of the carnival brings throughout the year to the local community? Is it the impact of, on lives and well-being? And the Department of Culture, the British Department of Culture, recently published a report where they're trying to calculate the positive effect of investment in culture in terms of preventing crime, in terms of mental well-being. It's complicated, but they came up with a figure of 2 billion a year, on the basis that preventing is cheaper than correcting. So it's much cheaper to create a youth center in a difficult neighborhood or a cinema for, than, paying for the consequences of, youth crime and stuff like that and locking them up. So I think that we should figure out ways And also overproduction. Overproduction, yes, it's an issue, but let's see it as, you know, maintaining a global, you know, production of values and content and exchanging and stuff like that. 2 bullet points, two. Very quickly. A, incentives to distribution, yes, but let's make it selective. Let's link it to, you know, what do they reach out to local communities? Do they reach out to schools? Do they have a special program? Not automatic. Secondly, for your next panel next year, I think it's interesting what Philippine, when she started talking about how they do stuff, she mentioned, well, of course, the point is the author, the director, the creator. There was a word missing, producer. So I think that if big spenders bypass producers to create their contents, we have a problem. Sorry.
Thank you. I let you react, Philippine, but I see Edith already ready with the microphone.
I'm always ready, yes. No, it's interesting what you're saying. You know, how do you measure? You know, the measurement should be, you know, how happy is our industry? You know, how happy are our authors and independent producers? And, you know, it should be, but we don't really do it, you know, because I think the creation is always coming also from the satisfaction or this kind of positive environment, rather than always being stressed. You know, where does the next money come from? But as to the measurements, obviously, what we should really measure and what we are not doing is that how strong are our companies. You know, we go for a very simple numbers always. It's very easy to get this information, but yeah, the main measurement would be, you know, what kind of state, what kind of health is our filmmaker, our author, our scriptwriter, and also our producer. You know, how do they feel? You know, and how strong are the companies? What do the numbers show? You know, I think that it's also, again, everything as a whole system, or let's say the ecosystem, but depends on not only on money and numbers, but also about our slightly happier filmmakers. I very feel for that we don't really put the emphasis on that at all. You know, we do look, your film got this amount of admissions, well done, let's move to the next. And we shouldn't really, we should appreciate them. We should really make them value themselves, you know. Feeling.
How do you measure that?
Exactly. Again, we haven't really sorted it out yet, but that's why there's so many people here in the room, you know. Shall we do it together, you know? Because it's, the film funds is also like, you know, come up with a solution, you know, do something, do make better. But why don't you just help us sometimes, you know, just to figure it out how to do it so that you will get the better results and feel happier?
Well, we'll have a Q&A session, so we will have, so start think about it. And in the meantime, Marianne.
I just want to add that the Nordics are taking responsibility of the environment, but at least we are trying. In 26 now, the Nordics are implementing something called Nordic Ecological Standard, which means that if you don't, you know, are able to prove that your production is green, you're not going to get any public funding. At least it's a start.
Interesting perspective. Peter, and then Philippine issue.
Just for the measurement, yes, I think there should be new metrics. And honestly, we don't have it yet. We have some good ones. We audit also, but it's more about leverage. It's more about spend, and this is not enough. If production comes to Germany in order to shoot in Berlin, for instance, I'm happy. Leverage. If it leaves the country, then it should leave Berlin richer than before. Meaning I want to have a know-how transfer. I want to have skilled crews afterwards. I want to have an international network. I want to have so much. And we call it sustainability because this is what remains in Germany. And this is only an example, also certainly valid for every other country. And we want to keep it in Germany, and we have to measure it. We don't do it yet, but it might be a very good idea to do it. And to develop metric schemes to find out how sustainable an incentive system really is by the end of the day. And then why shouldn't we also measure the cultural value of an incentive system? You mentioned, is it visible? Are the films visible? Is the content visible? Has it an audience? Will it be seen? Does it run on a festival like Cannes or a smaller festival in my country? I don't know. But we should also address the cultural and, I would say, commercial success in cinema or the cinema landscape. This is a little bit the address, and there we have metrics for.
It looks like this is a great topic, the one of the metrics. Philippine.
As I said, Carlo, we always work with a European production partner when we film here in Europe, and we don't consider this partnership as a commissioning or work for hire. We always have a very shared vision, and we work hand in hand on all aspects. So that's very clear for us. And on metrics, I think the EY CNC study on production incentives provide a very good model of assessing all the direct and not so indirect economic impact of incentives. So it's a very good model to replicate across the EU, I think. And maybe we could even add more metrics in terms of societal impact and beyond the pure economics.
Yeah, thanks. On the metrics, I think only you lift now, Philippe, and then I have a final yes and no question to you all.
I think the most important things were said, but I will add to it my egoistic interests that all this, what was said, will not work if it's not carried into the future. The sustainability will not work, and the only objects or subjects who are carrying that are production companies and producers. So the incentives should be always related to independent producers.
Very clear. Now, final question, a yes and no question. Could your country, since you are from different countries, all of you, would it be possible to imagine the production without incentives? Let's imagine from one day to another they just disappear. Would that be possible? Yes, you want to start?
Of course not, but can you mention an industry that would thrive without public investment of different sort? Maybe prostitution, and maybe football, but I'm not sure about that.
But I was not referring to all public funding, only incentives. Yeah. Any other views?
No, we can't survive, but only smart incentives.
Only smart.
Only smart ones.
That's great. Any other views?
No.
No.
Can't imagine it. Your study from the margin into the core of European production industry, if I take out the core, dead.
Yeah.
It can be tried, but I think very soon the effect that we would see is less production, and for the production that are being carried out, less risk-taking, less artistic ambition. So.
Yeah, to be contrary, yes, of course, but as you say, it would be less. So no.
Yeah. And you, Philippe?
And I think it would really drop substantially now. The world is not ready like it for that. Basically, we are in the stage. It has developed over many years and decades, so it's not impossible. But I would say that we should not forget about something what was also mentioned in the balance of the system. It's incentive obligations, which are now more and more increased topic. And this is just partly, also the answer to the overproduction, or because maybe if we have enough demand from our partners on the market, some of these capacities, I mean talent and production capacities, which are sometimes producing what they are in that part which we call that was something which was overproduced, that can be used for something different, for something better and clever. So I think for me, very important. We need, I mean, we can have a production incentive, but we need to have it for productions which gonna be in the end of the day seen. Yeah. So we need a natural demand, and the demand should come from the players on the market, streamers, broadcasters. Now the production obligations are, I think, very important.
Thanks for that.
Yes or no for what?
If it could survive.
No, I said no. I said
you
not
all
possible
said
to survive.
no or yes, but then less production. That's the clear outline here. Well, we would solve the overproduction problem, but maybe not in the best way. I would like now to give the floor to you. There is a more portable mic that can circulate. So if any has any contribution, maybe an answer to the questions. See a hand of the person of the two. Yes, please. Please say your name and affiliation first so we know you are.
Perfect. Mafalda Damaso, European University Institute. I'm part-time professor. I'm an academic. Thank you so much for this conversation. I speak a lot with film professionals, and I hear that there's a certain fear or awareness of a fear to the bottom in terms of competition, as you mentioned, for investment in the European film sector. And some film professionals suggest that to avoid that race to the bottom, there should be minimum or maximum, depending on the issue, European-wide standards. And my question is whether you support an European-wide minimum investment obligation or levy on streamers, and why? Thank you.
Here we're not talking about incentives, though. Here we are on the AVMSD, so it's a little bit off topic, but we can reflect. I collect some other questions in the meantime.
Hello, my name is Maria Sherban. I work as a statistics officer at Europa Cinemas. And I would like to know if you have any insights into what kind of rules, if any kind of rules, were set regarding the eligibility criteria and cultural tests when it comes to the use of the AI in the creation of the projects. Thank you.
Incentives and AI. A third question to group it with?
There's a question over there.
On the other side. Yeah, you need to run over, Maria. I'm sorry.
Paweł Kosecki from Poland. I am a professor of finance and tax advisor. My question is, when you created tax incentive system, have you checked the cash flow for investors and producers? Because let's say it's much more difficult to chase the unicorn movie if you make the movie if you produce the movie in Estonia for Estonian market than if you make it in Germany for the German market.
So, I don't know if who wants to start with it? Can you just repeat the key word of your question? The microphone. Yeah.
I asked about the criteria of cash flow for investors, because generally you make the you create the incentive system to support production, and the question is it possible to have you checked how is possible to earn the money? Because if you make the movie for small audience, it's much more difficult to earn money. Especially on small markets like Estonia, Baltic states, or Czech Republic, than on the big market like Germany or France.
So if the question is, do we check it? Yes, we do check it, and they somehow find the money. It is complicated, as you said, in a smaller market because it doesn't really function the same way as a big market. As an equity is a very huge problem in general. So, but yeah, we do check it. So yeah, it has to be in place, and usually it is done through the co-producers or through the other investors. So there is in Estonia, it is very interesting. There is one of a very big investment fund, put together by the tech companies. Estonia is very high on tech. We have 4 or 5 unicorns, and one of them. One of the investors created also the fund to support the film. So with the help of the different funds, mainly in the region, and together with the co-producers, it is possible to cash flow the projects.
Then there is this question of the minimum and maximum on the production incentives. I see Philippe is ready.
Yeah, I'm also in the board of European Producers Association, CEPI, and we are dealing with this question a lot. I think we don't support the maximums because we want to leave the states, to have the freedom to create their policy. But at the same time, we see that in many countries, especially smaller countries, or maybe let's call it emerging, or like Eastern European, Central European countries, where there is a much easier to lobby against that if this issue is only solved on the local level. So we in general support heavily some kind of general minimums because otherwise it will not work for certain countries. And I think still it's fair because it's always about percentages, and why not to give some money back to the industry if you are basically earning money there, you are collecting money from the subscribers there. It's totally fair. The market is changing. Before the consumption was much more through the broadcasters. Now it's basically spread into different sources or different distribution streams. So this money would kind of disappear slowly from the markets, because we see also the politicians now, they say, no, we don't need to give so much money to public broadcaster because TV is not so much seen anymore. So that it would be a threat for the production, for the industry. So I think it's absolutely fair to have this kind of tool.
Thank you.
I think we constantly try to standardize our rules, or through the Europe, but it doesn't really work. It's still a market economy, and every country and every member state should really have the freedom to do it. But yes, if it's a minimum, and I think it is, the minimum is more or less already agreed, and so is the maximum, more or less. You sort of like take it from the market. So I don't think you should really start to say agree between all the players that this is the maximum what we take. Yeah. And that we do talk to the streamers and listen to them, how they put up with the smaller markets and their percentages.
Yeah. Well, it's 11:29, so then it must be really, really short.
The one question was on to which extent AI is included in the eligibility criteria for incentives.
Shall we really open this subject right now in the end? Or we do another panel? It's a huge subject.
Yeah, we can maybe think of it for another panel. So thanks for the question. It's unless anyone has a 10 seconds answer, but it would be.
We should be open-minded.
Yeah. Okay, well then I would just say that I think we leave the session today with many thoughts, but one is clear: incentives have come to stay. It's difficult to think that we will make it without them, but they might be recombined, be made smarter, and be better measured with the metrics. I think that is one sentence wrap up. So thank you very much to Philippe Bobinski, Carlo Crestodina, Edith Sepp, Peter Dinges, Philippine Cora, Marianne Burul-Bolan. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you also to my colleagues, Sophie Vallet, Elisa Joliveau-Bonnet, and behind the scenes, Alison Hindhoff and Maria Milanova, and Martin and myself for having been here with you. Thank you.